woman sleeping downstairs heard someone rattling her bedroom doorknob. She assumed it was one of her friends coming back early from the night out, so she got up and opened the door. A man in a mask and gloves was standing on the other side. This happened in April 2026, inside a large short-term rental property in Nashville, Tennessee. A bride-to-be named Michaela Rodriguez had booked the house for her bachelorette weekend, and there had already been a few things about the property that made the group uncomfortable. One guest had arrived a couple of hours before the others and experienced trouble opening the front door with the keypad. While waiting for the host to let her inside, she noticed a group of men nearby who had a direct view of the entrance and appeared to be watching her. Later, after the rest of the group arrived, they discovered that the door leading to the rooftop had been left unlocked. It seemed strange, but in the excitement of arriving, setting up the house, and preparing for the weekend, they found reasons not to worry about it. The break-in happened that first night. Most of the group left the rental around midnight to spend the evening in the lower Broadway area. One male guest decided to stay behind because he was tired. He remained in a bedroom on the second floor while the rest of the group went out. Later that night, one of the women began feeling unwell and returned to the house early. She went into the only bedroom on the first floor. The two guests were now in separate areas of the property. Neither had any reason to believe there was anyone else inside. At some point, the guest upstairs began hearing movement throughout the house. It sounded like several people had returned. He heard footsteps, people moving between rooms, and even the sound of someone flushing a toilet. The noises continued for around 15 minutes. He didn't get up to investigate. The rental was large, and he assumed the rest of the group had come back from Broadway. Nothing about the sounds suggested that strangers were moving through the property. Downstairs, the woman heard someone rattling her bedroom doorknob. She assumed it was one of her friends trying to enter the room, so she crossed the floor and opened the door herself. Instead, she found herself face to face with a man wearing a ski mask and gloves. The man immediately turned and ran. The woman had just enough time to lock the front door, lock herself inside the bedroom, and then retreat into the bathroom, where she locked a third door between herself and the rest of the house. She contacted the group still on Broadway and told them to call the police because someone was inside. The male guest upstairs received the warning while he was still in his room. The sounds he had dismissed for the previous 15 minutes suddenly made sense. The people walking through the house had not been members of the group. Even after the masked man ran from the downstairs bedroom, the guest upstairs reportedly heard movement continuing through the property. At one point, he heard the intruders going toward the third floor. That meant the man seen downstairs may not have been alone. The guest waited until he believed it was safe, then made his way down to the first floor. He helped the woman leave the house, and the two of them got outside before the rest of the group returned with police. Metro Nashville police reportedly believed that at least 2 people had entered the rental that night, which raises a detail that tends to get lost in the retelling. While one intruder was standing close enough to a bedroom door to be seen face to face, another person may have been moving through the upper floors of the property, completely unnoticed. Once police allowed the group back inside, everyone began checking their belongings. That's normally the point in a story like this where the purpose of the break-in becomes clear. Here, it didn't. Designer bags were reportedly still in the rooms. Laptops, cameras, televisions, alcohol, and other visible valuables were all exactly where the group had left them. Nothing appeared to have been taken. The obvious explanation was burglary. Police said short-term rentals can attract thieves, particularly when large groups make their schedules easy to predict. But that still left questions. The intruders had been inside long enough to walk through several floors, use a bathroom, and try the door of an occupied bedroom. At least one of them had come prepared with a mask and gloves. Yet the obvious valuables remained untouched. Maybe the intruders were interrupted before they had the chance to take anything. Maybe they entered believing the house would be completely empty. Or maybe they were searching for something specific that was never publicly identified. There was also the detail the group had noticed before the break-in, the men with a direct view of the front entrance, watching as the first guest attempted to enter. No connection between those men and the intruders has been established. But once everything was over, it became difficult for the group not to wonder whether somebody had been paying attention to the house from the moment they arrived. What is known is that a woman opened her bedroom door in the middle of the night because she believed she was surrounded by friends. Instead, she found a masked stranger standing close enough to reach out and touch her. The group relocated to a hotel where they said they felt safer. Police confirmed that at least 2 people were believed to have entered the rental, but no clear explanation for what they intended to do was made public. The intruders left the Nashville property before anyone could learn what they wanted. In the next case, the stranger inside the house didn't leave. He remained long enough for the family living there to begin questioning their own memories. The first thing Dutch Hoggett noticed was that his work shoes had gone missing. Then it was food. Then it was furniture, sitting in places different from where he was sure he'd left it. Dutch and his wife Sharon live in Searcy, Arkansas, in a house they know well. The kind of familiarity where a person would notice if a chair had been moved, or if something had been taken from its usual place. Over several days in late April 2026, small things kept changing around them. Dutch's work shoes disappeared without an explanation. Chairs appeared in different parts of the house. Food began going missing. Reports say the family also discovered that a donut and an apple had been partially eaten while they were away. On their own, none of those things sounded alarming. This is exactly the kind of situation a person talks themselves out of. Maybe Dutch had misplaced the shoes and forgotten where he put them. Maybe someone in the family had moved the chairs and never mentioned it. Maybe an animal had somehow gotten into the food. Individually, every incident had a boring, reasonable explanation available. Their daughter didn't see it that way. As the inconsistencies continued, not just one missing object, but several changes that no one in the house could explain, she became convinced that the property needed to be searched properly. The man inside the house had reportedly first entered the property's crawl space on April 27th, during a period of severe weather. The following morning, after Dutch and Sharon left the house, he made his way into the basement through an unlocked door. The opportunity to search came on April 29th, while Dutch was away at church. Sharon, her daughter, and her son-in-law went into the basement together. Tucked beneath the staircase was a small storage area. It was the kind of space that could easily go unchecked because there was no reason for anyone to believe a person could be hiding inside it. Sharon began looking through the area. Then she saw what appeared to be part of someone's leg or a pair of jeans inside the closet. She immediately backed away. Her son-in-law, Mark Gregory, stepped forward holding a baseball bat. The family still didn't know who was inside, whether he was armed or how he might react after being discovered. Gregory called for the person to come out. When there was no immediate response, he struck the surrounding doorframe with the bat. A man eventually emerged and surrendered. Authorities identified him as 41-year-old Preston Scott Landis and arrested him on charges of residential burglary and theft of property. The timeline meant that Landis had been moving between the crawl space and basement for approximately 2 days. That wasn't as long as the family initially feared, but it was long enough for him to take food, move chairs, and remain hidden beneath the same roof, while Dutch and Sharon tried to explain the changes around them. What happened next is the part of the story that tends to split an audience down the middle. Landis reportedly apologized before he was taken away, and rather than describing him purely as a threat, members of the family expressed sympathy for him, frightened by what they'd discovered, but also aware that he appeared to be struggling and had initially sought shelter during severe weather. That reaction doesn't come with a clean answer attached to it. Does desperation change how a situation like this should be judged, or does it stop mattering once someone enters another family's home without permission? Was the family being compassionate, or dangerously forgiving of a stranger who had already taken their belongings and lived unnoticed beneath them? If Sharon had opened that storage area and found someone reacting differently, someone armed, cornered, or panicking, the encounter could easily have ended somewhere much worse. Most cases like this begin with something easy to dismiss: a missing pair of shoes, food that can't be accounted for, or something sitting where nobody remembers leaving it. If you'd rather hear these accounts told straight, without invented details or exaggeration, consider subscribing. The next intruder didn't remain hidden for 2 days. He lived beneath a family for nearly 3 months, and by the time police found him, he had constructed an entire living space. For nearly 3 months, a married couple and their daughter went about their lives directly above a man they had never met. Beneath their floor, he had lighting, televisions, gaming consoles, and cooking equipment, all of it running on power quietly drawn from their own electricity. And from where he was, he could hear them talking. This happened in Happy Valley, Oregon, in a townhouse where the family had no particular reason to think about the space beneath their living room floor. Their crawl space was just a crawl space, the kind of area most homeowners forget exists, until something forces them to think about it. They slept, ate, worked, and talked the way any family does, with no idea that a stranger was close enough underneath them to hear at least some of their conversations. By the time deputies discovered the hidden living space on September 3, 2025, the man had reportedly been there for approximately 2.5 months. For all that time, the family continued their ordinary routine overhead, while a stranger's own version of that routine played out beneath the floorboards. It wasn't the family who first noticed anything was wrong. It was a neighbor. The neighbor saw an unfamiliar man entering the crawl space from outside the townhouse and decided it was worth reporting. Which raises an uncomfortable question on its own. If the neighbor happened to see him entering this one time, how many other times had he come and gone without anyone noticing? Deputies arrived at the property and inspected the crawlspace entrance. The door had been secured, forcing them to use a Halligan tool to breach it. Standing just inside the entrance was a man later identified as 41-year-old Benjamin Bucher. He was arrested immediately. Behind him was something the deputies had not expected to find. The crawlspace had been transformed into an elaborate, well-lit living area. Power cords ran throughout the space and connected to the family's electrical service. There were multiple televisions, gaming consoles, cooking burners, and a gaming area. Bucher had even hung decorative string lights. This wasn't an empty crawlspace where someone had taken shelter for a single cold night. It had been constructed, piece by piece, into something closer to a hidden room than a temporary hiding place. A private residence had been operating directly beneath somebody else's home. Investigators also recovered a sword, several knives, and a pipe containing methamphetamine residue. According to the prosecutor, Bucher was positioned close enough to hear some of the family's intimate conversations taking place directly above him. That single fact changes the entire shape of the story. This wasn't only about a stranger occupying a hidden space beneath a family's floor. It was about how much of their daily life he may have absorbed simply by being close enough to listen for 2.5 months. Did he learn their schedule well enough to know when the house would be empty? Did he hear details the family never intended anyone outside their own walls to know? How did he carry multiple televisions, gaming equipment, cooking burners, and everything else into the crawl space without being noticed? None of those questions has been fully answered in public. What is known is that Bucher would come and go while the family remained unaware of his presence. He used their electricity to power the hidden living space, and he remained beneath them long enough to establish a routine of his own. Bucher was convicted of first-degree burglary and sentenced to 36 months in prison in May 2026. Before the trial, he also pleaded guilty to possession of methamphetamine. The legal outcome closed the case on paper, but it couldn't tell the family how many times a faint sound beneath the floor was dismissed as plumbing, an animal, or the house settling. It couldn't tell them exactly how much he heard. And it couldn't explain how someone managed to build an elaborate living space beneath an occupied home without the people above him realizing he was there. For 2.5 months, in the house the family believed belonged only to them. They were never quite as alone as they thought. In the first 3 cases, whoever entered the home was eventually seen, arrested, or given a name. In the case that follows, nobody has been. The women being targeted only know that whoever is responsible seems to understand exactly when they're alone, and has continued to return for years. The person knocking on windows in the French village of Goudelin does not appear to pick houses at random. According to the women who have been targeted, the visits tend to happen when they're alone in the house. In several cases, the knocking reportedly started only after a husband had died or been taken into hospital, leaving a woman living by herself for the first time. This has been happening in the small Brittany village of Goudelin for roughly 3 years, and as of 2026, it still hasn't stopped. It started, as these things often do, with something easy to dismiss. An elderly woman would hear pounding on her door or window shutters late at night. Some reported seeing the beam of a flashlight near their homes. Whoever was responsible never lingered long enough to be caught in the act. By the time anyone reached a window or called for help, the person had usually disappeared through a garden, over a hedge, or along one of the paths running between the houses. On their own, a handful of reports like this don't necessarily sound like a pattern. They sound like local teenagers, the wind catching old shutters, an animal outside, or an elderly resident mishearing an ordinary noise in the dark. That was how some of the earliest incidents were treated. Several women said they weren't taken seriously and were made to feel that what they had heard was either confusion or imagination. Then the reports continued, and once they were looked at together, instead of one at a time, the pattern became much harder to dismiss. This wasn't a single frightening night that made headlines and prompted an immediate manhunt. It was years of scattered incidents across a small community, each one easy to write off in isolation. A woman hears something outside her window late at night. She tells a neighbor, who mentions it to another woman, who realizes the same thing happened to her several nights earlier. The pattern only became visible because enough women independently described experiences that were extremely similar. Around 30 women have reportedly been identified as victims. One woman documented more than 120 visits between April 2024 and November 2025. The houses being targeted shared certain things in common: women living alone, no dog in the house, and timing that suggested whoever was responsible knew when visitors had left. In one case, the knocking reportedly began after a woman's husband entered hospital. In another, the prowler waited until the woman returned from an evening event before approaching her home. A dog or the arrival of guests often appeared to keep him away. That's not the behavior of someone selecting houses completely at random. It suggests a person who understands the victim's routines, when they go to bed, when relatives visit, which homes contain dogs, and which women will be alone after nightfall. The prowler does not usually appear to be trying to force his way inside. In most accounts, the pattern is similar: knock, wait for a reaction, and then disappear before anyone can reach him. In some ways, that ambiguity makes the behavior more unsettling. If the goal isn't entry, and it isn't theft, then the fear itself may be part of what the person wants. Whether the motive is intimidation, control, entertainment, or something else has never been established. As the harassment continued, the women adapted the only way they could. Shutters started closing earlier. Some stopped going out alone. Others asked relatives to escort them home or remained on the phone with someone after dark. People stopped sitting close to windows and began watching their gardens more carefully. One woman lowered the volume of her television at night so she would be able to hear the prowler approaching. Another reportedly became so traumatized that even an ordinary knock on a hospital room door caused her to scream. Eventually, residents began organizing their own response. Neighbors installed surveillance cameras. Relatives formed patrols and waited close to homes that had already been targeted. Some residents hid near gardens and garages, hoping to catch the person as he approached. The prowler adapted. Reports indicated that he sometimes used a flashlight to interfere with surveillance cameras. One camera captured only a dark silhouette near a porch. On another occasion, the deputy mayor briefly caught sight of a man in his headlights. He described someone tall, athletic, dressed in dark clothing, and capable of quickly escaping over gates and along the old paths between houses. Still, nobody managed to identify him. There's something particularly unsettling about that failure. Gudalin is small. It isn't a sprawling city where a person can easily disappear into crowds or unfamiliar streets. It's the kind of place where residents recognize one another's cars, and where an unfamiliar person walking around after dark would normally attract attention. For someone to move repeatedly through that environment for years without being identified suggests either extraordinary caution or an intimate understanding of the paths, gardens, and spaces that remain outside the view of cameras. One morning, physical evidence was discovered in the snow outside a targeted home. It was the print of a combat-style boot, at least a European size 45. The print gave investigators something physical to consider, but it wasn't enough to identify the person wearing it. Either the prowler had been careful enough to avoid the cameras and patrols, or he understood exactly when and where the village was watching and adjusted his movements accordingly. That uncertainty eventually turned the mystery into a crisis inside the community itself. Suspicions settled on a 68-year-old retired municipal employee, someone who had lived locally for years, knew the village well, had an athletic build, and wore size 46 shoes. No public evidence has established that he was responsible for any of the incidents. Several residents, including women who had been targeted themselves, defended him. The harassment also reportedly continued while rumors about him spread, complicating the theory rather than confirming it. What's left is a village that no longer fully trusts its own explanations. Is this one person, methodically returning to the same list of houses? Is it more than one person, perhaps including copycats who learned the pattern after the story became widely known? Are all the reported incidents connected, or have years of fear caused separate events to become grouped together? By April 2026, around 15 formal complaints had reportedly been included in the investigation. Authorities acknowledged that the case appeared to involve a mixture of established incidents and a wider sense of panic spreading through the community. The accusations aimed at the retired municipal worker created a second kind of damage alongside the original harassment. Neighbors who once greeted one another without thinking started watching each other differently. Some residents felt the man had been treated unfairly, placed under suspicion because of his shoe size, build, and familiarity with the same streets every longtime resident knew. Others weren't willing to rule him out simply because some victims defended him. Either possibility leaves something uncomfortable behind: an innocent man living under suspicion he doesn't deserve, or a village defending someone it should be watching more closely. Whoever is behind the knocking appears to understand which women live alone, which homes contain dogs, and when a visitor has left for the night. That could mean the person has been watching the village carefully from somewhere outside it. Or it could mean nobody notices him watching because he was never really an outsider to begin with. He already belongs there. None of these 4 cases began with something dramatic. They began with footsteps mistaken for friends coming home, food that couldn't be accounted for, electricity quietly being drawn from beneath a family's floor, and knocking that neighbors initially dismissed as nothing more than a prank. In every one of them, the most dangerous assumption anyone made was that there had to be an ordinary explanation waiting somewhere underneath the strange one. Which of these 4 cases stayed with you the most? And what do you believe the intruders inside that Nashville rental were actually there to do? Leave your theory in the comments below. And if you'd rather hear true accounts like these told without invented details or unnecessary exaggeration, consider subscribing to Grimvale Horror Stories.